Hi there, and thanks for watching this video. My name's Geraldine van Oord. I am the founder of the Gut Friendly Dietitian. And my team and I, what we do is help people just like you who are suffering from uncomfortable, unpredictable, and distressing symptoms like stomach pain and cramping, bloating, changed toilet habits like diarrhea, constipation, and reflux. What we do is help you find a diet to settle down your symptoms and identify what those actual food triggers are so that moving forward you can make informed decisions about the food choices that you make and bring back predictability into your day as well. So with today's talk, we are looking at the 10 most common mistakes that are made on the low FODMAP diet and also what you can do to avoid them. So Megan and I, we are the consultant dietitians at the Gut Friendly Dietitian, and this is probably the majority of the work that we do. Most of the time people have already heard of the low FODMAP diet and they've given it a go themselves and they haven't gotten really good symptom relief. And so what we're doing is troubleshooting why it's not working for them. So I've put together this presentation so that you can identify what the most common mistakes are, because let's face it, a low FODMAP diet is not exactly straightforward. It's quite complicated, right? And what we want to do then is provide you with some strategies on how you can make sure that you then avoid those mistakes so that you can settle down your symptoms faster. So if you're ready, let's get started. All right, so common mistake number one, using unreliable sources of information. Now, wherever you've heard of the low FODMAP diet, it is really important to make sure that you're using the right information to get you by. If you've heard of the low FODMAP diet via, say, Google, for example, you might find that the low FODMAP food lists that you see all available on the internet, they're littered, literally littered everywhere, are very variable and even conflicting. Now, this is the same if you've been handed a 1 A4 piece of paper on what the low FODMAP diet actually is. You'll find that this is really restrictive in terms of what you can and can't eat and what you need to avoid and what you can include, and it's just not complete. So what I would suggest is that you download the Monash app. And Monash University are the founders of the low FODMAP diet. And this is where a lot of the research has taken place to certify low FODMAP food products, but to also test foods for their FODMAP content. So I would suggest that instead of using any random phone app, which again, you can get really conflicting information about FODMAPs on, is I would look at the Monash app, which is about $13, and it's a one-off payment. The extra money goes back into research for the low FODMAP diet as well. And you use the app for not only just your food lists, which uses a traffic light approach. So it uses red traffic lights to indicate that a food is high FODMAP, yellow traffic lights to indicate that the food is moderate in FODMAPs, and then green being low FODMAP. There's also other information in the app as well, so recipes, information on FODMAPs and the low FODMAP diet and so forth. So it is absolutely worth your investment. And I would highly recommend that you do that as a starting point if you are looking at starting a low FODMAP diet. There are some other reliable sources available, like A Little Bit Yummy. That is probably one of my most favorite low FODMAP recipe websites. There are a bunch of others these days as well that are really reputable, but you also need to be careful because anyone can start a website these days and they can say that, you know, a recipe is low FODMAP when in fact it's not. So just be a little bit wary about where you're getting your information from. A Little Bit Yummy has recipes that are actually checked off by or reviewed by FODMAP trained dietitians like myself, so you know that all of her recipes on there, as well as her blog articles, which are really useful sources of information as well, they're all low FODMAP. My other favorite reliable source of FODMAP information is actually a Facebook support group, and it's called Low FODMAP Australia. It was founded by a dear colleague of mine, Joanna Baker, and she has a team of dietitians, including myself, and some other, I guess you can call them low FODMAP veterans, people who have been on the low FODMAP diet and understand it well, helping to manage the group to make sure that the information that is on that group is relevant, is evidence-based, and is supportive. So I really love this Facebook group for someone who is on a low FODMAP diet. Moving on to mistake number 2. So often I'll see people who do a low FODMAP diet or who start a low FODMAP diet and they go completely gluten-free, or they may feel like the diet needs to be completely gluten-free, or that all gluten-free products are also low FODMAP. Now, neither of those statements are true. So the reason why you're moving more so towards a gluten-free diet or gluten-free pattern way of eating when you go on a low FODMAP diet is because, not because gluten is the issue, but it is because a lot of products like breads and pastas, for example, that contain gluten also contain FODMAPs. And so when you are moving from a gluten-free from a regular bread or pasta to a gluten-free bread or pasta, what you're doing here is cutting back on not only the gluten, but also the FODMAPs. And so while you're actually, it looks like you're targeting gluten, you're actually not, you're targeting FODMAPs, if that makes sense. So they're two separate food triggers. For the majority of people that I speak to who are not celiac, often it is the FODMAPs that people are reacting to rather than the gluten component of these sorts of foods. But from time to time, I do find people can be gluten intolerant in itself. But for the majority of people, you don't need to go completely gluten-free when you're starting a low FODMAP diet. So what can you do to avoid this and know which foods you can and can't have that contain gluten, but don't contain the FODMAP? So again, a reliable source of information is the Monash app. So if there's anything that is that contains wheat, so say for example you look up some bread, one small slice of bread, regular bread, is actually low FODMAP, so it can still be included on a low FODMAP diet. As you get your head around a low FODMAP diet as well, you'll start to learn of some of the other food products that are actually wheat containing but a low FODMAP, such as soy sauce, such as the Baker's Delight low FODMAP bread, such as wheat or spelt sourdough. So I just thought of another thing, actually. A Little Bit Yummy has a really good blog article on what are the wheat products that you can still have when you're on a low FODMAP diet. So if you Google that and that comes up, then that's a good one to have a read of as well. A similar mistake that we commonly see is that people who start the low FODMAP diet may also go completely may go completely dairy-free. And this is something that is not necessary. Okay, so lactose is the FODMAP that's found in some dairy products, and it's the FODMAP that we're trying to temporarily eliminate when you go on a low FODMAP diet. But it's not all dairy products that actually contain this FODMAP. There's only a few. So particularly things like milk, regular yogurt, ice cream contains lactose, and you can easily swap to a lactose-free version now from the supermarket. They're quite easy to get access to. But if you weren't aware of this information, often what we see is people go completely dairy-free when this is not necessary. If that's your preference, or if you need to do that for other reasons, that's absolutely fine. But purely if you weren't aware of that, then just going lactose-free rather than dairy-free is actually a much easier way to do it, where you're still including quite a lot of foods that you always enjoyed anyway, and they're safe for you to enjoy. So why not, right? So I'm talking about things like cheese or traditional Greek yogurt. Those sorts of foods can actually stay in when you're on the low FODMAP diet. You don't need to cut them out. Okay, so similar to the gluten mistake that I just talked about, check the Monash app to see which dairy products you still can have on the low FODMAP diet, and then learn which foods are, they just contain dairy or they contain the FODMAP as well. And as you check the Monash app, you'll start to get your head around that in more detail. Mistake number 4, not sticking to portion size. So I often see people on both ends of the spectrum here. They're either over-restricting their diet because they feel like a FODMAP portion is smallish, and so they will just decide to not have it at all, or might see someone who is having something that could be low FODMAP but having a really large portion of it, and so they're over-consuming that FODMAP. I'll give you a more concrete example. Broccoli. From memory, I think the green light broccoli amount is 3/4 of a cup as a low FODMAP amount, and then it's something like over 2 cups or something like that off the top of my head, that it then becomes high FODMAP. So there is quite a lot of room to move before it becomes higher in FODMAPs. But because it's only 3/4 of a cup for broccoli that's low FODMAP, some people may just completely remove it from their low FODMAP diet, and that is not necessary. You're going to be cutting out extra nutrients and fiber when you don't need to. On the other end of the spectrum, something like avocado. Avocado is only low FODMAP when you're having about 1 to 2 tablespoons, which is equivalent to 1/8 of an avocado. But if you're not looking at the portion sizes properly on your Monash app, then you may be over-consuming avocado, and if you're quite sensitive to the FODMAP in avocado, which is sorbitol, that's when you might not be getting really good symptom relief on the diet. So again, just make sure that you're checking your Monash app and you're really monitoring the portion sizes. So what is low FODMAP that you still can have? Often you might need to scroll down a little bit within that food because it might be rated overall as a high FODMAP food, but when you go into it, there's a low FODMAP amount that you can still enjoy if you would like to. All right, so how to avoid it. I mentioned that already about the Monash app. Another thing that you could do that I like to do quite often is writing out a personal food list. So writing out the usual fruits and vegetables that you have and checking them against the Monash app and writing down the portion sizes of each serve, the portion sizes or the serving sizes that you can have in each meal. So for example, you write down, like if we're staying on the broccoli example, under your vegetables list, you'd write broccoli, dash 3/4 of a cup or something like that. And I hope that it is still 3/4 of a cup. That's low FODMAPs. I haven't checked it in a while, and I'm doing that off the top of my head. So it'd be very embarrassing if it was not. So while I'm thinking of it, I'm actually going to check now. All right, so Monash app. It's just loading. Of course, it feels like it takes forever when I'm trying to make it go faster. All right, broccoli whole, 3/4 of a cup is low FODMAP. Thank goodness for that. All right, next mistake. What are we looking at? Not checking food labels. Ooh, this is a really common one. So FODMAPs can easily hide in so many food products, so you need to be across some of the really common names for FODMAPs, and they can be, easily recognizable, like onion powder, garlic salt, or something like that. But they can also be hidden. So some really common ones would include inulin, chicory root fiber, vegetable fiber, or another really common one is vegetable powder or dried vegetables, something like that. They are all code words for FODMAPs. So if you see any of those words on food labels, you actually need to avoid those products in the elimination phase of the low FODMAP diet. The other thing that I sometimes see is foods where you don't think FODMAPs would hide will often be hidden in them. For example, one that I came across recently is salt and vinegar chips. Some brands contain, I can't remember if it was onion or garlic, and then other brands don't contain onion and garlic. And I would have thought that it would just be, potato and oil and vinegar of some description and salt and no onion or garlic, but apparently it does. So make sure that you're always flipping over whatever it is that you buy just to double check and make sure that it doesn't contain any hidden FODMAPs. And the FODMAP ingredients would be the ones found in your Monash app, or so your onion and garlic, for example, or some of the really common ones, so inulin, chicory root, etc., that I've just mentioned as well. All right, another really common mistake is not planning ahead. So when you're on a special diet, it is really hard to just pick something off the shelf and run with it and try and wing it. There are a lot more specialty products these days, so it is easier to do the low FODMAP diet on a whim. But what I would suggest is that you do plan ahead and plan your meals, do your shopping based on your meal plan, and it can be flexible as well. You don't need to plan all your meals, but having the availability of products that are safe to you is going to mean that you're going to be able to stick to the low FODMAP diet easier and get that symptom relief quicker as well. Number 7. Not finding alternative nutrient sources. The two biggies that I personally see are fiber and calcium. Now, when you're on a special diet, often we're swapping, we're reducing down on some of the vegetables, if you're not replacing them with low FODMAP alternatives, or going gluten-free often means that you're also cutting back on fiber as well. And so for someone who is more diarrhea predominant on a low FODMAP diet can actually become constipated, and someone who was more so on the constipation side of things to begin with can get even more blocked up. And so it's really important to make sure that you're choosing low FODMAP products that are not just low FODMAP, but that are also high in fiber so that you can avoid this issue from occurring. The other nutrient that I find that people start to lack in when they go on a low FODMAP diet, if they're not being mindful, is calcium. And that's mainly because they cut down on their dairy intake because of the reason of not knowing or not realizing that the low FODMAP diet is not actually dairy-free. Things like cheese, you don't need to choose a special cheese. You can keep having cheese on a low FODMAP diet and therefore still have your calcium. But often I see people who cut out their cheese and their yogurt and then they'll swap their dairy to a dairy-free milk alternative, and sometimes it's not even fortified or has added calcium in it, which makes it really hard to, meet your calcium requirements if you've done that. So in this slide, I've added some ways to avoid not finding alternative nutrient sources, like making sure that you're choosing high fiber, low FODMAP whole grains like brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat, keeping your low FODMAP fruit and veggies intake up. You also need to keep your fluid intake up to help to make sure that you're not getting blocked up. And then continuing to use dairy products if there's no other reason not to, but choosing lactose-free varieties, either ones that are naturally lactose-free like cheese or ones that have the enzyme lactase added to it so it becomes lactose-free, like a lactose-free milk or a lactose-free yogurt, which is suitable as well. Number 8. Staying strictly low FODMAP indefinitely. So I think there's been a lot of talk over the years now that a low FODMAP diet, strictly speaking, is meant to be a short-term diet, but from time to time I still do see people who have been on a low FODMAP diet for a very long time. So ideally, you're only looking at staying on a low FODMAP diet for 2 to 6 weeks, and within 1 to 2 weeks of doing it properly, if you are a responder, which up to 75% of people are, you'll notice that your gut symptoms settle down. So there's quite a quick turnaround, given that a lot of people that we speak to actually have gut symptoms and suffer with these symptoms for many, many years. So the low FODMAP diet, if you weren't already aware, is actually a 3-phase diet. So you've got the first phase of the diet, which is elimination, and that's where you're pulling back on the high FODMAP foods, and that's only meant to be 2 to 6 weeks. If you get good symptom relief within that time, you then move straight on to phase 2, which is called the challenge phase. And this is where we're reintroducing each of the FODMAP groups one at a time to see, to identify what is actually the triggering substance or the triggering FODMAP. And that way we use the results of the challenges to then guide the third phase of the diet, which is liberalization. Or in other words, expanding the diet back out to a level where the symptoms are still nice and controlled, but you're also allowing high FODMAP foods back in the diet so that you're not as restricted as you are in the initial investigation where we're doing elimination. All right, so the final thing to add here that's quite important is that if after 2 to 6 weeks you're not getting good symptom relief, it is really important to either go back through this entire presentation, because there's lots of tips and tricks in here, and or see a FODMAP trained dietitian like myself and my team, because we can help troubleshoot what might be going on and why you might not be getting good symptom relief. So make sure that you do that. In saying that, don't be too hard on yourself. This is a really complicated diet. It's not like you're just cutting out one thing. In fact, you're cutting out multiple things temporarily within multiple food groups. So it's not exactly straightforward and black and white. We all make mistakes when we start the diet, and this presentation is intended to just help you make sure that you don't make those mistakes so that you can settle down your symptoms faster. But it is a big learning process, so please don't be hard on yourself. And if you do make a mistake, you don't actually need to start your 2 to 6 weeks all over again. Just pick up where you left off and just keep going until you get at least a week of good symptom control, and then you can move straight on to your challenges. Now, the final mistake that I wanted to speak to you about is not particularly a mistake. I'm not sure what else you would call it, but basically doing the low FODMAP diet alone. I've mentioned multiple times that it is quite a complicated diet. There are some intricate details associated with the diet, which makes it more likely that you might have a couple of mistakes crop up here and there. And you can spend hours of your time doing research to find the right answers. Don't feel like you need to do the diet alone. Get support from the Facebook group that I was talking about, or save yourself time and fast track your results by working with a FODMAP trained dietitian. In the Monash app, there is also a directory for all of the dietitians who've completed their FODMAP course. So I think the FODMAP course, the Monash FODMAP course, the online official one, specifically for IBS and the low FODMAP diet, was released a few years ago. I think it was something like 2017, 2018. And I was one of the very first dietitians to actually undergo that course. So once you finish that course, you are a Monash trained FODMAP dietitian, and you are added to that directory. So with whoever that you do see that will help you with the low FODMAP diet, make sure that you check that they've got that qualification, but also make sure that they've got experiencing and managing people who do have IBS as well. Some cases are more straightforward than others, and others can be quite curly. And if you want to get the best symptom relief as quickly as possible, then I would be suggesting that you go down the route of seeing someone who is quite experienced. So that is my final point on the presentation of the most common mistakes that I see on the low FODMAP diet and what you can do to avoid them. If you'd like to find out more, or if you have any questions or comments and you'd like to contact me and my team, you can find us at www.thegutfriendlydietitian.com.au, or you can also search for us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram as The Gut Friendly Dietitian. So I hope that this was really useful. Good luck to you on your journey. And if and when you need some assistance, we are here to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. All the best.